This is Northern Ireland, a small land of green fields, old stone and quiet villages, pressed against a sea that has never been gentle. From above it can look almost untouched. That calm is deceptive. Rope bridges hang over open water. Castles and libraries cling to cliffs. Tides cut off the way home, while storms tear at churches, trees, and the land beneath them. History has tested these communities just as hard. They stayed anyway. They learned to fish dangerous water, farm exposed slopes, and rebuild after fire and conflict. Northern Ireland is beautiful. But look beyond its peaceful surface, and a far stranger world begins to appear. So who actually lives here? Around 1.9 million people. Some live in busy cities. Others remain close to farms, harbours and villages shaped by the water. Along the coast, families learned to depend on two worlds at once. They fished when the sea allowed it, then returned to sheep, cattle, orchards and wet fields above the shore. Mountain water became whiskey. Seaweed, oysters, bread, apples and the morning catch became the taste of home. Nature adapted beside them. Seals raise pups on tidal shores. Seabirds crowd the cliffs. Red squirrels hold on in protected woods, while birds once lost are slowly returning. And the past never disappears completely. Empty villages hide in the hills. Ruined estates face the Atlantic. Old roads vanish beneath twisted trees. Places once marked by division now carry signs of peace. Beyond the famous coast lies a hidden Northern Ireland. It is a world of dangerous water, working communities, rare wildlife, local food, faith and memory. The beauty draws you in. But the side most people never see is where the real story begins. "98 feet above the Atlantic, a single rope bridge swings out to a lump of rock called Carrick-a-Rede. Salmon fishermen strung the first one across this gap around 270 years ago. In the 1960s, a single crew could pull 300 salmon out of these waters between one dawn and the next. By 2002, the whole season brought in barely 250. The salmon were gone and the fishery closed for good. For most of its life, the crossing was one rope handrail and a run of gaps that opened straight onto the sea below. Even now, some people cross to the island, look back and wait for a boat rather than face the walk again. The seabirds crowding past the ropes nest by the thousand on an island just up the coast. Those birds are the Razorbills, the closest living cousin of the great auk. The great auk was a flightless seabird the size of a goose, hunted off the face of the earth by the 1840s. Able to fly but built to swim, the razorbill turns into a different animal, Underwater, fast and deadly among the fish. Rathlin packs in more razorbills than almost anywhere else in the country. Visitors still turn up expecting penguins, a few centuries and one extinction too late. They share their ledges with one of the biggest crowds of seabirds in Northern Ireland. Puffins burrow into the soft turf at the top and lay a single egg at the end of a tunnel underground. Their numbers here have collapsed, down almost 3/4 since the late 90s. The cause was stowaways, rats and ferrets that slipped ashore and raided the nests. So conservationists began the first effort anywhere to clear a whole island of ferrets, a rescue years in the making. The cliffs stay crowded, but not far inland a whole village of people was once emptied out to nothing. The village is Galbilly, a scatter of stone cottages hidden in the glens of Antrim. A little over a century ago, nearly 50 households farmed these steep green slopes. There was no road worth the name, and drinking water came up the hill on the back of a donkey. Whole families lived and slept in a single stone room. By the 1950s, 6 households were left. The last of them all was a monk, who died up here in 2013, well into his 70s. Television found the ruins before the maps did, and rebuilt one of the cottages as a castle for a fantasy war. A different village down the coast made the opposite choice, and clung to the sea. Ballintoy is barely more than one street running down to the water on the far north coast. Its Irish name means the northern townland, and the village earns it, set almost as far north as the island reaches. Narrow medieval fields still run from the houses to the cliff edge. For centuries the place lived on 2 things, the fish in the bay and the sheep on the slopes. When the land changed hands in the 1600s, the new owner kept the salmon rights for himself. A tiny harbour hides at the foot of the cliffs just below the village. That harbour has played a kingdom on screen, the home port of the Iron Islands in Game of Thrones. Fans arrive to find something far smaller than the show. The dark chippings by the slip come from an old quarry that cut paving stone here. Every Easter, before the sun is fully up, people still gather here for a service at the water's edge. A small white church watches the sea from the headland above, and it has taken the Atlantic's worst for 2 centuries. The church went up in the early 1800s, but kept the tower of a far older one before it. Its bell is older still, first cast in 1686. Older still may be the silver at its altar, cast perhaps 2 centuries before the walls around it. Storms off the open sea have battered it again and again, and one great gale tore the roof clean apart. The green slopes around it feed a trade far older than any church on this coast. Sheep have grazed these cliff tops as long as anyone here has farmed. The grass grows salt-hardened and short, so tough hill breeds do well where softer animals would starve. Between the flocks on the slopes and the boats in the bay, whole families once made a living from land and sea at once. A bishop further along this coast built a temple on a cliff edge for the sake of his books. The bishop was Frederick Hervey, and the temple he set on this cliff edge was built to hold nothing but his library. Around the top he carved a line about how pleasant it is to watch a storm at sea from the safety of dry land. In time the joke wore thin. The cliff has crept so close that the whole temple had to be pinned in place to keep it from falling into the sea. Hervey was a Protestant bishop, yet he let his Catholic neighbours hold mass in the room beneath the books. On this coast, a churchman sheltering the other side under his own floor was close to unthinkable. His grand house nearby fared nowhere near as well. The house was one of the grandest in the whole country, packed with paintings by the old masters. Fire tore through it and took the paintings with it. What the flames left behind was patched up, lived in for a while, then gutted again and abandoned to the weather. Today it survives as a deliberate ruin, roofless windows opening onto nothing but sky and sea. Even while the family still lived there, one visitor looked at it and called the whole place a sad monument to human folly. The bishop left another strange monument out in the fields nearby, built not for himself, but for his brother. The monument was a mausoleum, crowned with his statue in marble. In the statue's hands, the bishop had set a copy of the Magna Carta, the old charter of English liberty. It was a bold thing to raise over a grave, an argument in stone about rights and freedom. Then came the worst storm in Ireland's memory. One night of wind ripped the statue and its stone dome clean off the top and flung them into the dark. The open parkland around it still does the job it was shaped for, and it feeds the cattle that keep it trimmed. Cattle have grazed this parkland since the estate was first laid out. They do more than fatten on the grass, they keep the whole design view alive. Left alone, the parkland would vanish under scrub and swallow the sightlines the bishop paid a fortune to create. A short way inland, another wealthy family changed the land itself, this time out of living trees. The family planted a double row of beech trees to line the approach to their house and let them grow into a tunnel. Their branches reached across the road and knotted together overhead, until the lane ran dark even at noon. That is how it got its name, the Dark Hedges, and how it became one of the most photographed spots in the country. A fantasy series filmed here made it a place of pilgrimage. So many visitors came that cars were crushing the routes, and the road finally had to be closed to traffic. People swear a grey lady drifts between the trunks after dark, and few nearby are in any hurry to prove them wrong. The grand house those trees were meant to impress still waits at the end of the avenue. The house is Grace Hill, named by its builder for his wife Grace. That whole famous avenue of trees was never meant to be a destination at all. It was only his driveway, a mile of living theatre planted to stun visitors before they even reached the door. The fields spreading out beyond the trees belong after dark to one of the country's rarest hunters. The barn owl hunts on silent wings, low over the fields, going after mice and voles it hears before it sees them. It was once a familiar farm bird that nested in old barns and hollow trees across the countryside. Fewer than 30 pairs are thought to survive in the whole country. Much of the harm is invisible, poison laid for rats working its way up the chain into the owls that eat them. As the old barns come down and the hedges go, the bird runs out of places to raise its young. The river watering these fields runs onto a village the whole world knows for one thing: whiskey. Bushmills grew up around one of the oldest working whisky distilleries anywhere on Earth. Whisky has been made in this village so long that families have worked that distillery for generations, and fathers still hand the trade to their sons. The secret is not even the river the village is named for. Its whisky is made with water drawn from a small stream off the hills nearby. It burned to the ground once and rose again within the year. When America went dry, one man here bet everything on it, hoarding barrels to sell the day the country came back thirsty. What the village pours at night, it soaks up again in the morning, on a plate served all across the north. The Ulster fries the breakfast built for a hard morning's work. Bacon, sausage, egg, and black pudding pile up like any fry. What sets it apart is the bread, two kinds that are fried right in the pan, both soda fal and potato bread. No breakfast south of here carries both, and people know home from away by the plate alone. Long before any of this, the people here left something strange on the high bog, and no one is entirely sure why. Up on the open bog of the Sperrins lie 7 rings of grey stone. These are no towering slabs, but stones barely past the knee. For thousands of years no one knew they were there, until turf cutters slicing the bog for fuel struck stone. The people who raised them were losing a slow war with the land, the soil going sour and the bog creeping over their fields. Some think the circles were a plea to the ground itself, an offering to bring the dead fields back to life. Off on the coast, other people planted their power on the edge of a cliff. Dunluce Castle clings to the top of a sea stack, with a sheer drop on almost every side. A cave runs clean through the rock beneath it, open to the sea and wide enough for a boat at the right tide. The chiefs who held it paid for its grandeur with a shipwreck. They stripped the bronze cannon from a sunken Spanish galleon and set the guns in their own gatehouse. The favourite tale says the kitchen once dropped into the sea, with the cook still inside, yet it survives in the ruins to this day. Outside the walls once lay a whole town with straight streets, and indoor flushing toilets, most of it still unopened under the grass. Money beat it in the end, not the sea, when its lords backed the wrong side and went broke. The cliffs that guard the ruin belong to a hunter that treats them as a launching pad. That hunter is the Peregrine Falcon, and in a dive it is the fastest animal alive. It climbs high above the cliffs, folds its wings, and drops on its prey at over 200 miles an hour. People long believed tiny cones in its nostrils let it breathe at that speed, and even copied the idea into jet engines. Nobody has ever proved it, and slow birds carry those cones too. Those cliffs also draw egg thieves and pigeon keepers who lose birds to it, so the falcon has never been short of enemies. The rock these falcons hunt from runs down the coast into the strangest shoreline in the country. The Giant's Causeway is 40,000 columns of dark stone. Legend hands them to a giant called Finn MacCool, who laid a road across the sea to fight a rival in Scotland. What's strange is the tale half checks out, because matching columns rise on a Scottish island right where that road would land. In truth, the stone is just cooled lava, cracked into these shapes as it hardened while still glowing red hot. Those cracks settle into 6 sides for the reason drying mud does, though a few here carry 5 or 7. This shore has seen worse than giants. One stormy night, a broken ship of the Spanish Armada came clawing past these rocks. As the tale goes, its gunners opened fire on a jagged line of stacks, taking the black stone for a castle. The first crowds rode out here on a coastal tram, run on power pulled straight from a river, the first of its kind in the world. Birds wheeling over the stones look like gulls, but one of them is nothing of the kind. That bird is the fulmar, a gull to the eye, but a cousin of the ocean albatross. It rides the cliff winds on stiff wings, gliding for hours without a single flap. Come too near its chick, and it fights back with its stomach. Stranger still, it drinks the sea, and weeps the salt back out through its nose. A fulmar can pass 50 years on one ledge, outliving most of the people who ever watched it. Further round the coast waits a village that looks oddly out of place on this Irish shore. The village is Cushendun, and its whitewashed cottages look lifted straight off the coast of Cornwall. That's exactly the point. A lord here built them to look Cornish for the wife he loved, who had grown up there. When she died, he kept on building in her memory, raising a whole terrace as a kind of mourning. Horses have wandered the glen behind it for as long as anyone here can recall. They belong to the glens the way the stone walls do. Farmers here still keep them for work and for company, turned loose on the steep green fields between the hills and the sea. A pony left to graze a glen like this pays its keep, cropping the grass that would otherwise choke the pasture. The coast west of here climbs into a black mountain with a much violent past. Benvane is a wall of black basalt, born of fire. It hardened from the lava that also built the Giant's Causeway, high above the sea. In thick fog, a wartime bomber flew straight into the mountain and killed everyone aboard. Eagles once ruled these heights until they were shot off the cliffs one by one and never returned. A statue of an old sea god watched over the headland until thieves sawed it from its base and carried it away into the dark. Where it had been, they left only a wooden cross, a warning against worshipping false gods. A small lake rests on the plateau above, but it's not nearly as wild as it looks. The lake was dug and filled by hand, not by any glacier. It lies in the peat on the roof of the mountain, stocked with trout for anyone willing to climb up and fish. Around it, the bog holds water like a sponge, feeding the streams that fall off the cliffs below. The woods below the mountain hide an animal that keeps one address for lifetimes on end. That animal is the badger. Its home underground can be older than the oldest house in the parish, a maze of tunnels dug and added to by one family after another. A whole clan lives down there together, and they keep their toilets in tidy pits outside the front door. At night they come up to hunt, and a single badger can swallow hundreds of earthworms before dawn. People dug into this coast too, and one white scar in the cliff still shows where. Larrybane looks like an empty grass car park now, but it was once one of the busiest quarries in Ireland. Men blasted the white cliff apart and dropped the stones straight down onto ships by bucket and pulley, thousands of tons a week. It went out to make paint, pottery, and sweeter farmland. The digging swallowed an old fort that had held this headland, gone before anyone could save it. Now wildflowers and nesting seabirds have taken it back, and a film crew once turned it into a battlefield for a fantasy king. Far to the south, another shore takes its orders from the tide, not from people. Portaferry lives at the mercy of the tide. Twice a day the sea pours in and out through a narrow gap beside the town, moving enough water to fill a small country's rivers. The current runs so hard, it throws up a whirlpool fierce enough to swallow a small boat. A little ferry has crossed that race for centuries, and more than once it has gone down with people aboard. One of the old castles along the shore was built by a bishop thrown out of the church for living there with another man's wife. The ferry that still makes the crossing does in minutes what would take an hour by road. The crossing is under a mile, one of the shortest scheduled ferry runs anywhere. Skip it, and the drive around the Lough is nearly 50 miles. So 500,000 people a year step aboard instead, cars and all, and let the tide do the work. These are common seals, and this lough is their most important nursery on the whole island. They haul out by the 100 on the mud flats at low tide. A pup is born ready for the water, able to swim almost from the hour it takes its first breath. Back north in the Glens, water creates a different wonder, falling in white steps through the trees. Glenariff is the grandest of the 9 glens of Antrim, a green valley, the ice ground out of the hills. A Victorian writer called it Switzerland in miniature, and it stuck. The famous path along its waterfalls was not built for walkers at all, but by a railway company to sell train tickets. They cantilevered the walkway off the wet rock and built a little shelter with coloured glass to frame the falls. Long before the tourists, a narrow railway hauled iron ore down this glen to the sea, then went bust almost as fast as it was laid. High over the valley, a broad-winged bird rides the air that lifts off these slopes. That bird is the buzzard, circling on the rising warm air with barely a beat of its wings. The cat-like mew over the glen comes from it, not a cat. It was once wiped out across all of Ireland, shot and poisoned to the very last bird. These birds flew back from Scotland on their own. The air that carries them lifts off the water falling through the middle of the glen. The falls drop in white stairs through a gorge thick with oak. Its two biggest falls carry old names, the Fall of the Mare and the Fall of the Hooves. Their spray feeds a plant so rare it grows nowhere else in the whole of Ireland. The oak woods here shelter one of the country's most hunted survivors. That survivor is the red squirrel, once everywhere, now clinging to a few strongholds like this glen. Its rival, the bigger grey squirrel, need not even fight it. The grey carries a pox that barely touches it, but kills the red within days. In woods like these, the red still hangs on, one of the last places it can outrun the sickness. A ruined royal hill lies inland, seat of a kingdom that ruled here before any of this had a name. Navan Fort was the capital of that kingdom, the royal seat of the kings of Ulster. This was the fortress of Cushendun and the Red Branch warriors of legend. At its centre they raised a huge wooden temple around one great oak, packed it with stone, and burned and buried it as an offering. None of it was ever meant to last. In the ruins they found the skull of a North African ape, a pet kept here long before Rome reached Britain. The place takes its name from Marcha, a woman of the other world made to race the king's horses while heavily pregnant. She won, then collapsed giving birth, and cursed the men of Ulster to fall as weak as a woman in labour whenever war came. The old kingdom raced chariots for glory, and a village to the north still races for it now, on two wheels. Armoy is a scatter of farms and one main street, and it should be famous for nothing at all. Instead, it raised the greatest road racer the sport has ever seen. Joey Dunlop won the Isle of Man more times than anyone and rode like the wet roads owed him a living. The medal that mattered most, though, came not for racing but for what he did in winter. Alone and without a word to the press, he loaded his own van with food and clothes and drove it to orphanages across Eastern Europe. The little village paid for its glory, burying 2 of its 4 racing sons within a single year. Between the races, the real work here has always been the land and the herds it feeds. Dairy is the steady engine of this whole countryside. The farms are small and the fields stay green year-round, and the cows are milked twice a day, every day, without a holiday. For all its size, this little corner sends out nearly a fifth of all the milk in the United Kingdom. On a thumb of land pushed into the sea, that calm country life once curdled into something much darker. Island Magee is not an island at all, but a lonely finger of land reaching into the Irish Sea. Its isolation bred an old fear of the unseen, and that fear boiled over into Ireland's last witchcraft trial. A young woman claimed she was possessed, throwing fits, hurling Bibles and vomiting pins and buttons whenever a preacher came near. On her word alone, 8 women were convicted. They were not burned or hanged, but jailed and locked in the pillory, where crowds pelted them for a crime that never happened. Three centuries later, a memorial finally named them, though the word innocent was struck from it after complaints. Away from the courtroom, the real life of the peninsula was always out on the cliffs, with the sheep. Sheep have held these windswept cliff tops far longer than any quarrel. Families still graze them right to the cliff edge, where the grass is salt-burned and the wind never truly drops. Long ago, the rent for this land was not paid in coin, but in hawks, taken from nests on the white cliffs below. Further south, another small place lives entirely by the water at its door. Strangford is a knot of houses around a harbour. Even the name is a warning, given by Vikings for the savage tide at the mouth of the Lough. They did not just name it, they seized the islands inside and ran longships from them for a generation before they were driven back out. Long before the Norsemen, another stranger rode in through these narrows and changed the island forever. A chief here handed St. Patrick a barn for his first church, and the Irish word for barn still names the spot today. Far from this village, one curve of white sand has drawn people since long before saints saw sails. White Park Bay is a long sweep of pale sand held between chalk cliffs and old grass dunes. This place is one of Northern Ireland's best preserved natural coastlines. Stone Age families lived and farmed in these dunes and left a tomb built to catch the midsummer sun. The white cliffs behind the beach are packed with fossils, the whole headland built from the shells of creatures that died in a long-gone sea. Cattle wander down onto the sand as if they own it, the closest thing the bay has to lifeguards. Lifeguards would help, because the calm-looking water hides currents strong enough to drag a swimmer out, and no one is allowed in. The dry sand even sings underfoot. Out past the breakers rides a heavy sea duck that treats this coast as home. The eider is the heaviest duck in these islands and the fastest in a straight line, built like a feathered cannonball. It swallows mussels whole and grinds the shells to grit inside. Against the cold northern sea it grows the warmest down in nature, the very stuff prized for the finest quilts. A mother plucks that down from her own breast to line the nest, then leaves it behind for anyone who dares gather it. Legend even credits a lonely island monk with the first law ever made to protect a wild bird drawn up for these very ducks. The sea that feeds the eider has wrecked its share of men, and one village lives with those ghosts still. That village is Port Ballintoy, a scatter of houses where the river bush meets the open sea. Just off its shore lies the grave of the greatest prize the Spanish Armada ever lost. The Girona was never meant to carry 1,300 men, but it had already plucked the survivors of 2 other wrecks from the rocks. It was not even running for home, but creeping toward Catholic Scotland for shelter when its rudder gave out in the dark. Of all those men, 9 reached the shore alive. The Lord of Dunluce hauled up its bronze guns for his own castle walls, and the sea kept the rest for 4 centuries. A drowned coastline like this belongs now to a small black and white bird, working the tide line. Loud, orange-billed and always busy, the oyster catcher stabs the mud for shellfish along every beach on this coast. For all its name, it barely touches an oyster, living instead on mussels, cockles and worms. Each bird learns one trick and keeps it, either hammering shells open or stabbing them apart, and it can reshape its own bill within a fortnight to switch. Some live past 40, working one strip of shore for a lifetime. Where the bird made the shore its own, people once built a whole seaside town out of nothing but a railway timetable. Whitehead exists because a railway decided it should. The company laid its track to the shore, then built a promenade, a bandstand, and bathing boxes to give its passengers a reason to ride. People came by the trainload for the sea air, and the whole town grew up around the timetable. When the crowds moved on, the resort emptied out, yet the streets never changed, and the town survives as a Victorian village under glass. The trains that made the town never quite left it, and a shed at the edge still keeps them alive. Inside, volunteers keep a line of steam engines in working order, some older than the country itself. These are full-size locomotives, not models, and they still light their fires and pull real carriages of passengers. One of them once ran its boiler dry on the main line and half melted its own firebox, a hair from disaster. The line runs close to the sea here, close enough to touch a lighthouse that has guided ships past the rocks for generations. Blackhead Lighthouse marks the corner where Belfast Lough opens into the sea. Its beam still turns every night, though no keeper has lived beside it for decades. A path clings to the cliffs below it, cut with tunnels and railings so walkers can follow a shore no boat could reach. These are modest cliffs, nothing beside the sheer black wall that climbers cross Europe to reach. Fairhead is that wall of dark rock. Its face drops over 300 feet sheer to the sea. Climbers rank it among the finest cliffs in Europe, 3 miles of stone columns like the pipes of a giant organ. Coal runs through these cliffs, and miners once drove tunnels straight into the rock face to chase the black seams. When the sea fog rolls in, they say a grey figure walks with it, and a gully in the cliff still carries his name. On the flat top, a tiny man-made island rests in a lough, lived on when these cliffs were already old. Tucked below the headland lies a bay so lovely, one man asked to be buried there. Merlot Bay drops in green steps to a shore few ever find. The man was Roger Casement, hanged for treason, who loved this bay above anywhere on earth. His dying wish was to lie in its old churchyard, but it was refused. A broken cross still marks the spot where he wanted to rest, looking out towards Scotland. An ordinary-looking town nearby hides one of the most important things ever to happen on this coast. Ballycastle faces the island of Rathlin across a channel of wild water. It was here that a whole new age began. Ships passed Rathlin on their way home, but carrier pigeons kept failing to bring word, so London's insurers hired a young Italian, Marconi. His men strung the first working radio link across the open sea, carrying news of the ships on invisible waves. It cost a life, a young engineer falling from a Rathlin cliff during the trials, the price of the first words ever pulled from thin air. That water carries an older tale too, of 4 children turned to swans and left to freeze here for 3 centuries. For all its wonders, the town is best loved for a fair and for a dark snack pulled straight out of the sea. Dulce is dried red seaweed, chewed from the bag like salty leather. People here have chewed it for well over 1,000 years, long enough that old Irish law set rules for gathering it. Once a year the town throws one of Ireland's oldest fairs, where dulce is sold beside slabs of hard honeycomb toffee. If the fair is the gentle way to meet this coast, one path takes the opposite approach, bolted straight onto the face of the cliffs. The Gobbins hang on a sheer basalt cliff above the sea. It threads through a natural cave in the rock and crosses a bridge slung over a gap where the waves boil below. When it first opened, the builders boasted it had no equal in all of Europe. Ever since, the sea has fought it, tearing its famous bridge into the water once and shutting the path with falling rock again and again. For all that danger, it is the only place on the mainland where puffins come to nest within reach of a walker. The puffins share these ledges with a stranger bird, black and oily green, that dives farther down than any of them. The shag looks black from afar, but up close it burns with an oily green shine, and a curl of crest gives the bird its name. It hunts by going down, plunging past 200 feet to chase fish along the seabed. Each dive starts with a small leap clear of the surface. Its nest is a reeking mound of seaweed, glued together with its own droppings, wedged onto a ledge or into a cave. This bird shares the cliff with a neighbour, packed so tight it lays an egg shaped like no other. Guillemots breed shoulder to shoulder on bare rock, more crowded than any other bird on these cliffs, and they build no nest at all. Each pair guards a single pointed egg, and for years, people thought the odd shape made it spin in a circle so it could not roll off. That turned out to be wrong. The real reason is strength, a thick pear-shaped shell that survives a neighbour crash landing right on top of it. Its chick does the bravest thing in nature before it can even fly, hurling itself off the cliff at a quarter grown, wings barely a parachute. The father leaps after it and raises it alone at sea, feeding it twice as fast as two parents could on the rock. After all that struggle on the cliffs, the coast softens into a gentle bay where people come simply to rest. Castle Rock is that bay, with Victorian houses lined above a long strand. It began as a handful of fishermen's cottages, until the railway arrived and turned it into a holiday town overnight. The line reaches it by burrowing through the cliffs, and at one point the train runs in darkness directly beneath the temple on the headland above. One coast then holds two worlds at once, a bishop's folly in the daylight and a rattling train in the dark below. Nearby crouches a low thatched cottage, older than almost anything around it, its roof held on curved timbers, bent like the ribs of a ship. Where the river spills into the sea beside the town, the water fills with ducks too ordinary to earn a second look. The mallard is the duck everyone knows, common as rain. Yet almost every farmyard and dinner table duck on earth descends from this one wild bird. It breeds with almost anything, so freely it can swallow rarer ducks whole. At night on the edge of the flock, it sleeps with half its brain awake and one eye open, watching for the fox. This little estuary is a puddle beside the greatest tidal sea in these islands, a water alive as nowhere else in the country. Strangford Lough is the largest sea lough in these islands, a tide-torn sea studded with over 70 islands. Those islands are drowned hills, the tops of a land the rising sea swallowed after the last ice age. On one of them, monks ground their grain with the tide alone. They trapped each high water behind a dam, then loosed it through a wheel as it fell. It is the oldest tide mill known anywhere, older than the faith of Islam itself. The tide that turned their wheel still rules the Lough, and engineers have sunk the world's first sea-powered turbine into its narrows. Each winter, the mudflats fill with geese from Arctic Canada, 3/4 of their entire kind crowded onto this one water. People have always taken a living from the Lough, and one of the oldest ways is farming the oyster. Rows of trestles line the mudflats at low tide, heavy with oysters. Most of them are a foreign kind, brought in to grow fast, that has since escaped and spread wild along the shore. The native oyster that belongs here was nearly lost, and now people are trying to bring it back, one reef at a time. A single oyster cleans gallons of water a day, so rebuilding the bed slowly clears the whole lough. The clean water draws bigger hunters, and the rocks fill with the largest seals in these seas. A bull grey seal is a giant, longer than a man and heavier than 3 of them, hauled out on the rocks like a boulder that breathes. It differs from the smaller common seal by a long, horse-like nose. Its pups are born on land in a coat of white fur they cannot swim in and must shed before they ever touch the sea. For a while these waters had almost none, and now hundreds are born here every year. Where the seals rest, small birds work the mud, and one of them is the loudest alarm on the shore. Nervous, orange-legged and never still, the redshank is the mudflat's self-appointed watchman. At the first hint of danger, it explodes upwards, screaming, and drags every other bird into the air with it. Hunters and hawks curse it, for nothing on the marsh is caught by surprise while it stays awake. Its numbers fall as the wet meadows it nests in are drained away. Not every shore is left to the birds, and one bright town lives entirely for the crowds the sea brings in. Portrush clings to a finger of rock, the Atlantic on 3 sides. The railway poured holidaymakers in by the thousand, and the town gave them beaches, ballrooms, and a funfair that still roars beside the sea. One old ballroom on the Strand was run so tightly that staff washed used candy floss sticks off the pavement to use again. White chalk cliffs curve away from the town, hollowed underneath into caves a swimmer can slip inside. The sea that feeds the town has always taken from it too, and its lifeboat crews have won medal after medal, pulling sailors from the water. But the whole world came here for something else. A run of dunes where a small white ball decides everything. Royal Portrush is the only course beyond Britain ever to host golf's greatest prize. For most of a lifetime, the Open was thought too dangerous to bring to the north. When it finally came home, the whole country held its breath for one man. Rory McIlroy had grown up on these dunes. He fell apart on the very first hole, and by the second evening the hometown hero was gone, beaten by his own course. A calmer man lifted the trophy that week, but the roar was for the homecoming itself. Long after the crowds leave, the town lives on what the boats still bring in each morning. The harbour was carved out of the headland itself, its stone quarried from the very rock it shelters. Crab and lobster still come ashore here, sold beside the water. The little seafood shacks along the front turn the morning's catch into the reason people drive for miles. Not every house on this coast was built in agreement, and one great estate is split down the middle by a marriage that failed. Castle Ward is a house at war with itself, one half classical and calm, the other half spiked with Gothic points and arches. A husband and wife built it together and agreed on almost nothing, so they simply split the design between them. His side is all straight columns and order, hers all pointed windows, and the line runs right through the rooms inside. In her morning room, the ceiling drips with stone fans copied from a royal chapel, a riot of Gothic over a doorway to his sober world. The marriage cracked apart the moment the house was finished, and she left it behind for good. Its old tower later became Winterfell, where television's most famous winter began. One small town nearby gave the world something far gentler, a tune half the planet can hum. That tune is Danny Boy, known the world over. It was written down in this small town from a passing musician whose name no one ever caught. The woman who noted it may even have written it down wrong, catching in plain time a melody that was played to a looser beat. An English lawyer added the words later, setting them to the tune without once setting foot in Ireland. Stranger still, it was the first town in the country lit by a river. Monks had pulled power from that river 1,000 years before anyone dreamed of electricity. If this valley gave the world a song of longing, another corner gave a writer a whole magic kingdom. That kingdom was Narnia. Its snow-topped mountains began as these, the granite peaks of Mourne. A Belfast boy grew up watching them and wrote that a giant might raise its head over the next ridge. Long before the tales, smugglers led ponies over these tops by night. Their loads brandy and silk and tea slipped past the excise men. The mountains themselves were carried off in pieces, their granite cut into blocks to pave the streets of English cities. Building a lake-to-water Belfast raised a whole hidden town up here, then let it vanish again once the work was done. One peak rises above all the rest, and its summit hides something far older than any of this. The peak is Slieve Donard, the highest ground in Northern Ireland. On its very top, where the wind never stops, lies a tomb built 5,000 years ago. No older grave in Ireland reaches higher, planted on the one spot closest to the sky. A hermit saint later made his cell among its stones, and for centuries people climbed each summer to pray there. Much later, map makers climbed to that grave to measure the whole island, turning a tomb into a survey mark. A wall built entirely by hand crosses that summit, and 14 others. The Mourne Wall runs for 20 miles over 15 mountaintops without a drop of mortar in it. Stonemasons raised it stone by stone over nearly 20 summers. They built it to fence off the valley below, so no sheep could foul the water Belfast would drink. To fill that lake, they bored a tunnel over 2 miles through solid mountain. In the hedges and fields under the wall lives a small animal armoured against the whole world. The hedgehog is a walking fortress of spines. It carries 5,000 of them and rolls into a ball no fox can open. Its name is a plain description, a hog of the hedges, grunting and snuffling like a tiny pig in the dark. Catch a strange new smell and it turns bizarre, chewing the sauce to a froth and painting it over its own spines. Through the cold months, it all but shuts down, its pulse slowing to almost nothing. For all that armour, it is vanishing fast, thinning out as the hedges and fields it needs disappear. Those hedges grow, a short walk away, into one of the largest living puzzles in the land. The castle well and maze was planted as a promise after the worst of the Troubles. "6,000 young ewes went into the ground, pushed in by thousands of school children. Its two halves are kept apart on purpose. Reaching the centre means both sides finally meeting in the middle. A bell waits there, rung by anyone who solves the maze and wants the hills to know. Faith runs old and stubborn in this land, nowhere stronger than in a city crowned by two rival cathedrals. Armagh is the oldest holy place in Ireland, and it wears 2 cathedrals like a double crown. Both are named for St Patrick, and they face each other across the city from separate hills, one Catholic, one Protestant. In the older one lies a king, Brian Boru, who broke the power of the Vikings and was buried in its wall. This gentle city also saw a terrible thing. One of the worst railway disasters the world had then known happened here. A Sunday school train packed with children that ran backwards down a hill and was struck. "80 people died, a third of them children, and their deaths forced safe breaks onto every train in the land within weeks." For all its sorrows, the country around Armagh is gentler ground, an ocean of apple trees. The Bramley apple has grown in these orchards for so long that its name is protected by law. Only fruit from this county can carry it, guarded as fiercely as champagne or fine cheese. That cool, wet air makes the apples sharp enough to sting the tongue, ideal for baking and cider. The orchards end at the hill where Irish Christianity first took root. St Patrick raised his first great stone church on this hilltop, and a cathedral has crowned it ever since. It has burned and been rebuilt more times than anyone can count. Each war that swept the north left it in ashes, and each peace raised it again from its own ruins. The hunger that built churches reaching for heaven later sent the city reaching for the stars. An archbishop built an observatory here and set his telescopes among the church spires. Every day since, someone has stepped out and noted the weather. That record has run unbroken for well over 200 years, one of the longest anywhere on Earth. The finest thing this land ever shaped, though, came not from a city, but from a starving village on the border. That village is Ballintoy, and the thing it makes is china so fine it looks lit from within. The pottery was born out of the Great Famine, started by a landowner to give his starving tenants honest work. He found the right white clay under his own fields, then built a railway just to bring in coal to fire the kilns. Their finest pieces are woven from strands of clay, as thin as thread, baked hard as bone. Anything less than perfect is smashed on the spot. If Ballintoy's fame rests on something small and perfect, another town is famous for the giants at its back. Newcastle lies where the Mourne Mountains walk straight into the sea. A famous song sings of those mountains sweeping to the water, though its writer pined for them from faraway London. The forest above the town wears Gothic gates and follies like a fairy tale, and television filmed its darkest winter here first. One old crossing nearby carries a grim name, from a day its river was said to run red with the blood of the killed. At the foot of the highest peak, a small harbour still pushes its boats out past the breakers. The harbour crouches right under Slieve Donard, boats bobbing in the shadow of the highest mountain in the country. Fishermen have worked this awkward line of coast for generations, hauling their catch back beneath the peak. There are few places on earth where a mountain that tall rises so fast from the sea. A grand hotel rises over the boats wearing the mountain's name. The hotel was built by a railway, its line run almost to the front door to spill guests straight into the lobby. For a certain holidaymaker, it was pure luxury, a palace by the sea with mountains at its back. Its design was chosen by the architect of a great London museum. Not every corner of this land lives so grandly, and the country soon folds inland to lakes and plain market towns. Lisnaskia kept the peace of a whole county from a grassy mound outside the town. Here the lords of the land were not crowned but made, handed a plain hazel rod, and named chief before the gathered clan. No gold, no crown, just a stick and a roaring crowd. In the old market square, a weathered stone cross carries Adam and Eve, the apple already in her hand. When the famine came, its workhouse filled past all reason, and dozens of orphan girls were shipped off to the far side of the world. The country around it hides something far stranger than any market, a land two countries share, but in reality, no one fully owns. Kilcar straddles the border between two countries, one mountain shared by both. It became the first wild place those two nations ever chose to guard as one. A Frenchman first found his way into its caves by candlelight, paddling the underground rivers in a folding canvas boat. He burned strips of metal to light the great stone halls, and came out soaked, filthy, and certain the world had to see it. On its slopes the rain sinks away and rises again miles off, in a dark pool that gives birth to the longest river in Ireland. The old tale names that pool for a woman drowned chasing forbidden wisdom, the river her name ever since. Through the woods and high moor around it moves the largest wild animal left in the country. A red deer stag rises taller than a man at the shoulder. Each autumn the rut is settled mostly by sound, rival stags roaring back and forth until one backs down. Only when two are matched do they lower their heads and crash antlers, sometimes to the death. Grown fresh every year, those antlers are among the fastest growing tissue on Earth, then cast off and started again. The bog they roam is so fragile that people built a wooden stair across it to keep boots off the peat. It's a long timber staircase that climbs the mountain, named the Stairway to Heaven. It was laid down to save the bog, a floating walkway that keeps thousands of feet from grinding the peat to mud. Then the internet found it, and the crowds it drew grew so huge they began to threaten the very ground it was built to guard. That open bog is home to a bird whose whistle is one of the loneliest sounds in the hills. Barely a dozen pairs of golden plover still nest up here. Their numbers keep sliding, year by year, toward none at all. In summer the birds vanish into the moor, gold-flecked backs melting into the heather. A thin, mournful whistle carries across the empty bog. Old country folk counted them, among the 7 whistlers, ghost birds whose night calls foretold a death. Come winter they mass into flocks that wheel and flash gold and white together. A great house below the mountain guards a living thing found nowhere else on Earth. One tree at Florence Court is the mother of thousands. Nearly every upright Irish yew on the planet, in churchyards from here to the far side of the world, is a cutting from it. A farmer found 2 strange seedlings on the mountain long ago, and only one lived to be copied. Seed will not breed it true, so every last descendant is sliced by hand from the living wood. The house behind it nearly burned to nothing, its finest ceiling saved only when someone drilled holes to drain the firefighters' water away. Silence held the old woodland for 300 years, until a lost drumming came back to the trees. The great spotted woodpecker had been gone from Ireland 3 centuries before it flew back on its own. It does not sing to claim its ground. It drums, hammering deadwood in a burst too fast for the eye. By rights, each blow should knock it senseless. Instead, its tongue runs so long, it wraps up over the back of the skull and anchors near the nose. The woods thin into water here, and an island town crowds onto the neck where two great lakes almost meet. Enniskillen balances on a single island so narrow the water is never out of sight. Two of the greatest writers in the language, Wilde and Beckett, learned their letters as boys in one school here. This small town raised soldiers who charged at Waterloo and carried its name to wars all over the world. But the day this town is remembered for is a cold November morning at its war memorial. A bomb tore through the crowd gathered to honour the dead, and 11 people, most of them old, were killed. One man dragged from the rubble had held his dying daughter's hand. That night, he told the world he bore no ill will and would pray for the men who did it. The lakes that cradle the town have brought it gentler days since, even a gathering of the world's most powerful leaders. On a lonely peninsula ringed by water, the leaders of the most powerful nations on earth once met behind a wall of security. The spot was chosen precisely because it is so hard to reach, guarded by the lake on almost every side. For days, a lakeside hotel held the fate of the world. Guarding that water long before any of them was a castle whose towers were built to rise straight from the lake. The castle's twin turrets began as a water gate, built so boats could sail up to the walls. Then the loft slowly dropped, and the water gate was left marooned on dry land. It held the one crossing between the two lakes. That crossing was the key that locked or opened the whole west of Ulster. The water it once guarded is really one long river, threading the lakes on its way to the sea. The Erne gathers 100 streams and spreads them into a maze of lakes and islands too many to count. For ages, salmon fought it from the sea to spawn. Then dams were thrown across its lower reaches for power, and the great runs of fish were cut off for good. One fish still rules these waters, and in the lofts nearby it splits into forms found almost nowhere else. In one lough on the border, the brown trout has split into 3 separate kinds. One grazes the shallows, one hunts the open water, and the third turns cannibal, growing huge on its cousins. They share one lake but never breed together. Where nature splits the fish, a nearby water is split instead by a border drawn between 2 countries. Carlingford Lough cuts inland like a Norwegian fjord, mountains rising on either shore. Ice gouged it out, then the sea poured in. A line on the map runs down its middle, so its famous oysters grow in 2 countries at once. The Vikings named it for a hag, a witch who once tricked a giant into a lake and left his hair white forever. A squat stone tower guards the narrows where the Lough drains to the river, and it has seen the worst this land can do. The tower was raised to hold the river crossing, its walls thick enough to shrug off a cannon. But its name belongs to a single afternoon, the darkest the British Army knew in all its years here. "18 soldiers were killed in 2 blasts on the road beside it, more than in any other attack of the Troubles. No one was ever brought to court for it. The tide still fills the mudflats below the tower, and the birds that feed there know nothing of any of it. Boldest of them is the shelduck, goose-sized and painted in bottle green, white and a broad chestnut band. It nests underground, its eggs laid far down old rabbit burrows. Once the young hatch, whole families hand their ducklings to a single pair of minders and simply fly off. Come summer, almost every shelduck in this part of the world crosses the sea to one German mudflat to shed its feathers together. For a few flightless weeks they crowd there in their thousands, defenceless all at once. One of these shores keeps a far older secret, the resting place of the man who made Ireland Christian. Downpatrick claims the grave of St. Patrick under a single rough slab of granite. That slab is barely a century old. It was set there not to honour him, but to stop the theft of his grave. Pilgrims had been carrying the soil away by the handful, emigrants shipping it to America as a piece of home. The old rhyme says 3 saints fill the one grave, Patrick beside Brigid and Columba. In truth, no saint was ever dug up here, and the town took Patrick's name only when a Norman lord saw its worth. If one town guards where Irish faith was buried, another guards where it set out to conquer the world. Bangor looks like an ordinary seaside town. It was once a light for the whole of Europe. From its abbey, in the dark centuries after Rome fell, monks went out to plant learning across France and Italy. Inside its walls, choirs sang in relay, so the praise never stopped at all. One song written here was carried to Italy and shelved in a library in Milan, where it survives to this day. It is the oldest communion hymn on earth, its tune still sung in churches 13 centuries later. Vikings came for all that wealth of prayer, and one raid alone is said to have cut down 900 monks. The abbey is long gone, and the grandest building in Bangor now is a mock castle that runs the town. The castle never fired a shot or held off an army. It was never really a castle, just a grand country house dressed up as a Scottish keep, all turrets and towers. Today its rooms run the business of the town, and its old stables keep the county's history. The shore below its gardens has become the biggest harbour for small boats in the country. "500 boats and more ride at anchor here. Their masts packed together like a floating forest of steel and rope. What was once a working fishing harbour now fills with yachts bound for Scotland and the open sea. The water Vikings once raided is a playground now, its old dangers turned to sport. Beside all the new moorings lies a far older pool, where people have swum for as long as anyone remembers. A natural cut in the rock holds the sea calm behind the shore, the place they call the Long Hole. Generations of children learned to swim in it, long before the marina was ever dreamed of. It asks nothing and charges nothing, just a place to slip into the cold, clean water. The next village along holds a past far larger than its size. A cluster of cottages around a small harbour, Groomsport is easy to pass without a glance. Its oldest cottages survive only by a miracle. A minister and his wife stepped in front of the bulldozers sent to flatten them. From this small harbour, a shipload of families once set out to build a new life across the ocean. They were the first of their kind to go, the start of a great tide of Ulster folk to America. Storms tore their ship apart far out at sea and drove them home again. But others followed where they had failed, and their children helped shape a whole new world. This is Northern Ireland, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of Wales, check out this video.